Welcome to Tower of Heroes, stories from the stair climb of One World Trade Center. I'm Audrey Puente. This will mark the 4th year of this inspirational event as climbers make their way to the top in honor of those who made the ultimate sacrifice, those who ran into harm's way to save others. And this year carries a special meaning. Real-life heroes gave their lives to save students at the tragic school shooting in Parkland, Florida earlier this year. As Antoine Lewis shows us, their legacy will be honored.
The nation is still reeling from the February massacre at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, with tears still being shed inside 17 homes, where each victim's family still struggles to face each new day. Debbie Hickson is one of them.
He was adventurous, he was fun, he was always up for trying something different, and he just loved people. He was fun to be around.
49-year-old Christopher Hickson was the athletic director at Stoneman Douglas. Tall and witty, stern but caring, he was a veteran of the U.S. Navy and with the school system for more than 2 decades. He and Debbie met at a wedding in 1988. They married and started their family 2 years later. Debbie works at a school not far from Stoneman Douglas and was at work on February 14th.
When did you know that something had happened at the school?
Well, I was watching TV in my office, because you can watch it on the computer, and it popped up that there was a shooting at Douglas, and I was taken aback for a second. I was like, what? So I immediately called his cell phone to say, what in the heck is going on? And someone answered it, and I was like, oh, good, he answered it, but it wasn't him.
Several long and grueling hours later, she learned that along with 16 others, her husband was now gone.
I think in my heart I already knew, because I know my husband, and I know that he ran to go do what he could do, and that story just, that's what I see every night when I go to sleep, is I see that story of what happened to him. It's, sorry, it just breaks my heart that someone that passionate for kids could have had somebody do that to him.
Authorities confirmed to Debbie that after protecting as many kids as he could, Chris confronted the shooter.
He had an opportunity to get away, and he didn't take it. He turned around and tried to take the gun away from him. And had he just tried to get away, he would have survived. But that just wasn't who he was. So.
It's in Chris's memory that Debbie will help kick off this year's Tunnel to Towers Tower Climb, honoring FDNY Captain Billy Burke. She'll share that duty with the families of 2 other Stoneman Douglas teachers credited with saving students' lives, football coach Aaron Feist and cross-country coach and geography teacher Scott Beagle.
Scott grew up to be an amazing young man. Again, just a normal young man. You know, I'm so proud to say he's my son.
Scott Beagle's parents say that family, teaching, and helping others were just a few of his passions. Only 35, Scott had already worked as part of a humanitarian team in South Africa and spent years as a youth counselor at a camp in Pennsylvania. He was a teacher at Marjory Stoneman Douglas for only 6 months.
I was home, and I was watching TV because I had the flu, and I heard about the shooting on TV. They broke into the news. And I called my wife and I said, what school does Scott work in? Because I saw that it was south of Boca. He lived in Deerfield Beach. I knew his school was around that area. So she said to me, well, it's a school with 3 names. I mean, she was kidding. We didn't know anything.
Watching the events unfold, the Schulmans learned that a geography teacher had been shot. They flew from Long Island to Florida as quickly as they could, praying and hoping against hope, before eventually finding out the truth on what Linda Beagle Schulman remembers as the worst day of her life.
Total disbelief, and I got up and I actually went to the back of the room. There was a garbage can because I threw up.
In sheer heroism, Scott Beagle was killed while ushering students into his classroom for safety from the attacker. His family says that's simply who he was.
When we heard finally what really happened, we weren't surprised because that's what Scott would do. Scott would look after his students.
If anybody was going to save children's lives, it was going to be my son. But I was kind of hoping he'd save their lives, but also be spared his.
As all of the Parkland families now navigate this still early road of grief, Debbie Hickson and the Schulmans say the widespread outpouring of support will help them on that journey. With pride, they'll represent their loved ones at One World Trade Center on June 3rd with Stephen Siller's family. All of them aware the heroes aren't made, they're born that way.
Stephen Siller strapped 65 pounds of fire equipment on his back when the World Trade Center was hit and ran to the World Trade Center and died. My son opened the door, saved 29 kids, and died. A hero is someone who looks out for the other person first.
I hope that he knew that that's how people saw him. Like, we're seeing it now, but I hope that he felt that while he was still alive, because it's so special. And, you know, someone told me that they thought he did, and so I hope he did. I do.
Next, keeping history alive. One firefighter's pledge to teach the past to future generations when we return. It was right here at the North Pole where 25 years earlier, the first bombing took place at the World Trade Center. One firefighter who was there after the 1993 attack and again on September 11th has made a pledge to make sure that the site's history is passed on to a new generation. Here's Arthur Chien.
Words come easily to describe Jack Ohm. At the top of our list, probably resolve. Ohm was just a 3-year-old growing up on Staten Island when he knew he would become a firefighter, regardless of the risks.
You want to save a life, you want to save a life. It's as simple as that. It's a calling for people, in my opinion. It was a calling for me, and I think it's the highest calling you can have, to save somebody's life.
Driven by his life purpose to help people and to make a difference, Ohm would be put to the test in two of the most significant moments in our city's history. The first, in 1993, a truck packed with a 1,300-pound bomb detonated. The intention was to send the North Tower collapsing into the South Tower, to kill tens of thousands, and this was a crucial moment for then Lieutenant Jack Ohm.
93 was the tip-off, that they were going to come back and get the towers. And for whatever reason, we didn't take it seriously.
8 years later, in 2001, now a chief leading 9 battalions, Jack Ohm would unfortunately be right. 17 years and a retirement later, Ohm's resolve is unwavering. He's still on a mission to help people and to save lives, but not by running towards danger, rather by highlighting it in the form of the 9/11 Never Forget mobile exhibit, a 1,000-square-foot museum rolling around the country on a 53-foot tractor trailer. The exhibit draws children and adults alike, and Ohm kicks off each talk with a simple question that illustrates the problem.
I'll ask them where they were on February 26, 1993, and I get a blank stare. Nobody recalls that day. And I say, why?
A cost of forgetting made personal as we looked over the last column that's still on exhibit at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum.
Arthur, this is the last column that they brought out. You see, Ladder 101 was one of my companies that lost 7 guys up there. That's what I wanted to point out to you. We lost 7 guys. They became known as 7 in heaven. I remember the 7 faces that I used to eat dinner with and eat lunch with and go on golf outings with and play softball with and play basketball with. They were part of your family.
Even the faces that were unfamiliar to Ohm before that Tuesday in 9/11 cut deep.
These are the faces of the people that died, going to work, doing their job for their family, and never coming home again.
You recognize a lot of these names?
Oh, yeah, so many names.
In the end, as we walked along the names on the reflecting pool, the calling became the theme Ohm emphasized, believing in our hearts a fundamental lesson can prevail, a principle we should all be talking about: kindness.
I can disagree with you. That doesn't make you a bad person, okay? And that's what we have to understand. Just because I think differently or I believe differently than you doesn't mean I'm bad. It just means I'm different.
It is a message Jack Ohm is as resolved as ever to amplify. All the fuel he needs to keep that fire burning inside of him is right here, and he is prepared to push on and preserve that important lesson from this piece of history.
Coming up, the NYPD detective who lost his battle to cancer years after his efforts at Ground Zero, and the brother who will climb to the top of One World Trade Center in his memory. Stay tuned.
Nearly 17 years after September 11, the effects are sadly felt to this very day, as thousands of first responders who worked at Ground Zero are now paying the ultimate price with their health and their lives. Kerry Drew introduces us to a man who is climbing to the top of One World Trade Center in memory of his late brother.
Mike was a good guy. He was a friend to everybody. He was always very supportive of me. Always a fun-loving guy, liked his vacations, liked his time away, liked to take rides on his motorcycle.
Stephen Leddick is remembering the life of his older brother, former NYPD detective Mike Leddick.
He always had a big heart. He loved his daughters, he loved his wife, and he loved his family. And that was one of the most important things to him.
Mike Leddick was one of 8 children. He grew up on Long Island and became a third-generation NYPD officer in 1986.
This one here is Mike at his academy graduation for the NYPD Academy. My father did 23 years on the NYPD. My brother learned it from my father. It meant a lot to him. He loved the job. He was the type of police officer that wanted to help people.
Mike rose through the ranks, becoming a detective at the 106 Precinct in Queens. He was working there on September 11, 2001. In the months that followed, Mike sifted through the rubble at Ground Zero and at the Fresh Kills landfill on Staten Island, helping to identify remains.
They were setting up all the debris up there, and they were looking for identifiers, and that's what hit home with him. You know, he said there's things that survived the buildings and the fires, and, you know, calling the families to hand them a license, a photo, or a frame, or an article of clothing. And that's all the families have. That's what broke his heart. I know it affected him. I know it made a change in him as far as making Michael more of a family man and more opened up his eyes how important his family was to him.
After 20 years in the NYPD, Mike retired in 2006, moving with his wife Patricia and their 3 daughters to North Carolina. Last May, his life changed forever. He was rushed to the hospital after experiencing severe back pain.
So within 24 to 48 hours, Michael was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroendocrine carcinoma. It was a pretty aggressive cancer. Initially, it was up and down his spine and on his liver. I believe it was also on his brainstem. And initially, they thought it might have been genetic because there is some cancer in the family. But as the diagnosis went on, it was related to 9/11 because it was so aggressive and such a rare cancer.
For the next several months, Mike began a fight for his life.
The diagnosis hit us all hard. He was very optimistic himself, and he was in it for the fight. Mike's always been a fighter. Whether it be fighting brothers and sisters at home, there's 8 of us, whether it's fighting my parents or fighting to become a police officer, and then always a fighter. One of the toughest guys I know.
Mike's experience reminded him of the importance of funding for 9/11 first responders and their families.
Mike and I had spoken about the Zadroga Act many times, and the funding and what was going on down at 9/11, how safe they made it seem to be, but he knew in his gut, you know, there were things in the air. And I know we spoke about the funerals that were happening on Long Island, that gentlemen or officers or first responders that were in their 40s and 50s and early 60s that were being affected. We just never thought 18 years later he'd be one of them.
In February, less than a year after his diagnosis, Mike Leddick lost his courageous battle with cancer. He was 54 years old. To honor his brother's memory, Stephen Leddick will be participating in the Stephen Siller Tunnel to Towers stair climb at One World Trade Center.
My inspiration this year, or the reason why I'm running this year, is for my brother Mike. The team name is actually my brother's badge number, which is 23268, and he actually got it from my father's badge number. And when my father retired in '86, my brother took on his badge number.
Stephen says he knows each step will be difficult, but he'll be thinking about his big brother the whole way.
My brother Mike will always be with me. He always was with me. It's unexpected to think that I'm now part of a family affected by 9/11. So it means more to me now than it ever has.
Next, a Marine Corps veteran severely wounded in combat, ready to make this year's climb in honor of those who sacrificed abroad and here at home. His inspirational story when Tower of Heroes returns.
He fought for our country, and now he's fighting a different type of battle here at home. Despite losing both legs in combat, Marine Corps veteran Rob Jones made it his new mission to honor those who served like him and lost their lives. Liz Dahlem has his inspirational story.
When did you make the decision to join the Marine Corps?
In 2006, after my junior year at Virginia Tech. I was just kind of feeling like I was missing something in my life.
From that point on, Marine Sergeant Rob Jones didn't look back. After a tour in Iraq, he was sent to Afghanistan, where he was tasked with finding IEDs.
July 22nd, 2010, we were doing a push into Taliban territory, and the point man actually stepped on an IED before me. And the one that he stepped on didn't function correctly, so I moved forward in order to clear a route through that area. And I stepped on the secondary or the tertiary or whatever it was, and that resulted in double above knee amputations.
5 days later, Jones woke up in Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland.
When I first got to the hospital, I mean, it was tough just to even lift my stump up and down a few times. Luckily for me, I wasn't the first amputee to come through Walter Reed, and so it was packed full of other guys that were also amputees and going through the same exact thing as you. So there really wasn't a period of isolation right away, because you actually went just from one close-knit family to another close-knit family.
That's when Jones figured out his next mission.
And that was to learn how to walk again. And so that was a big benefit to me, because a lot of people come home and they don't know what to do next. Well, I knew exactly what I needed to do.
He was fitted for prosthetics and learned how to walk with 2 bionic knees and hasn't stopped since.
When I became a double above knee amputee, I used that opportunity to go to the Paralympics. I used that as a springboard to ride my bike across the country in 2013 and 14 and raise money for veterans and raise awareness for veterans. And then I used that as a springboard to try and make the Paralympics in triathlon in 2016, which I didn't make. I failed to make it. But then I used that as a springboard to, again, raise awareness and funds for wounded veterans by running 31 marathons back-to-back in 31 different cities.
Jones raised more than $200,000 for different charities, including the Stephen Siller Tunnel to Towers Foundation. For the 3rd straight year, Jones will take part in the Tower Climb.
While Rob has competed in several athletic events like marathons and the Paralympics, he says there's really nothing like the Tunnel to Towers Tower Climb.
It's in memoriam of the firefighters and the policemen that died here, and so you're climbing the tower where they climb to help people, and then ultimately sacrifice their lives. So what we're doing is sacrificing a little bit of effort and feeling some pain in order to memorialize their sacrifice that they made that day. And we know that we're going to come back down out of the tower where they didn't.
He's a living example of a true hero, one who is grateful to share his story. And on the day of the Tower Climb, he will run each step with a purpose, to honor the fallen.
I didn't know anybody that was killed. I didn't know any victims, but I mean, as a veteran, I mean, I know exactly why we went. This reminds me of what we're doing over there, and what we did and are still doing, and every time I see it, I know it's worth it. So this is just a solid reminder.
Thank you for joining us for this special look at stories from the stair climb of One World Trade Center. For everyone at Fox 5, I'm Audrey Puente.